And with that, it's 4 o'clock. Let's start. Boroughs and Burbs 74. I think I got that wrong on the email invitation. Welcome to Boroughs and Burbs 74, the Upper East Side show, the Silk Stocking District. And we have two experts today. We have Alfred Renna. Wave your hand. There he is, Alfred Renna on the Upper East Side, and Laurine on the Upper East Side. Now, I believe both of you not only sell on the Upper East Side, but I think both of you manage agents on the Upper East Side. So you're particularly plugged in to what's going on now on the Upper East Side, right?
Yeah, I don't sell myself, but I co-manage the corporate office, which we have about 1,000 licenses with the office, 750 desks, and the agents out of this location, and probably the same with Neil, really sell all over New York City. I mean, primarily the East Side, Upper East Side, but they're everywhere. Queens, Brooklyn, downtown. You have to go everywhere. You can't just keep it in the one region. But yeah, it keeps us busy.
And you're at Elm.
Douglas Elm, yep.
And you've been with Elm for how long?
Oh, probably total of about 17, 18 years.
Okay, so you're getting the hang of it?
Yeah. The wonderful thing about this is that our business continues to evolve. So with those changes, I have to get the hang of it every day.
All right. And Neil, you are where?
I'm at the East Side office for Brown Harris Stevens. That's on Park between 56th and 57th. And this office, we're at about just under 500 agents with licenses at this office. Same with me, though. Mostly, it's almost entirely managing, although we're in the field looking at potential listings and talking to sellers, potential sellers, current sellers, and some of our buyers will come by. So I'm not doing a lot of the transacting, but I am pretty dialed in with this group of agents. Are
you in the corner office now?
I am not in the corner. There are two offices. I'm stepping on some heads over here to get over there, but right now I've got two bodies in between me and the corner office.
Okay, just checking. So, and how long have you been with Brown Harris Stevens?
This is year number 7 at Brown Harris Stevens. Yep.
So we have some good perspective on today's show. We have two guys who are managing agents in the Upper East Side who cover the whole town and can give us perspective not only on what's going on in the Upper East Side, but how it compares to what your agents are seeing all over New York. So which one of you wants to start and give me a definition of the Upper East Side?
Oh.
That's an easy one. So if Alfred wants it, he could have it, but I don't mind taking it.
Go ahead, Neil. I'll add to it.
So typically thought of as 59th Street to 96th Street historically. That's starting to edge up higher depending on which platform you're using. And some people will say now that includes really the blocks up to 106th Street, especially as you get closer to Central Park. So on the west side, you have 5th Avenue, which runs down along the east side, if that makes sense, of Central Park. And you have the East River, which is the FDR over there. So East End Avenue, all the way to the east.
I grew up in Stuyvesant Town back in the 70s. And when I would take the First Avenue bus up to the orthodontist on 84th Street, my mother said, you better get off the bus at 84th Street, because if you have your nose in a comic book and you go anything beyond 84th Street, it's kind of a dangerous neighborhood. And one day that in fact happened, and I got off the bus at probably like 96th Street, and I was afraid. You're telling me that the line keeps moving northward in Manhattan, and that it's 96th Street is an okay kind of place these days, and even 100th and 106th Street is pretty okay these days.
Also traditionally, you can go further north on 5th Avenue, and that was always inclusive of the Upper East Side.
But the the Upper East Side, a lot of people think that's very specific to the two avenues and the streets off of those two avenues near the park.
You know what, it's been referred to as the Gold Coast, and I think it kind of depends on what decade you're in of selling real estate, but it's always been known as the Upper East Side. But once we started getting to online aggregators and mapping, they started using words like Yorkville and Lenox Hill, and people will say Lenox Hill, and you're like, Lenox Hill, like, what is that? You mean by the hospital? So, you know, a lot of people really not that live here are unfamiliar with using those boundaries of those quote unquote neighborhood names. And it's really just the Upper East Side. And you're either, you know, traditionally you're either west of 3rd Avenue or west of Lexington or east of that avenue. That 3rd Avenue and Lexington Avenue sort of moves back and forth as to which is more premier than the other side, you know. There's been different attitudes over the course of many years.
You know, but the Upper East Side is so big, it's so vast that you have to segment it up in order to really, for example, to serve a client, you really got to start to parse it into pieces. Because I mean, if you were to take, for example, Riverside Drive on the west side and flip it over on the east side, you'd probably be at 3rd Avenue only. You know, it's so much more vast on the Upper East Side. And can you guys talk a little bit about how, you know, back in the day, if you were on the Upper East Side, it was all about being along Park and 5th and Madison, et cetera. But now it really has grown. Are you cool if you live at, you know, on 2nd Avenue in a $6 or $7 million apartment, or did you slum it way over there?
Well, that kind of depends on who you're asking, because I mean, the Upper East Side used to be the it area to live in New York City, but I would beg to differ now. I think depending on which generation you're in, the it neighborhood is probably Brooklyn, and that's all continues to be the fastest growing segment in terms of transactions. However, you have very different inventory, very different product, very different views on the Upper East Side as compared to the downtown neighborhoods. Also, the Upper East Side is a grid, so it's kind of very easy to navigate once you understand the avenues, you know, north and south, and the streets are east and west. You can't describe it that way when you get into Brooklyn or to downtown. You have to look at a map and try to figure it out. But it's very different, and I think we're actually starting to go through a bit of a revival or renaissance with the Upper East Side. As of right now, in the last couple of years, there's probably been about 20 or so new development projects, many of which have sold out quite quickly. You know, a lot of people that owned these very large, grand Rosario Candela type properties, many of them moved out and moved downtown into the tall, sexy glass buildings. You know, I think a lot of baby boomers did that. But now we have people moving back north with kids for the schools. So there's a very large cross section of price points, architecture, views, which you don't really get downtown or in Brooklyn.
And I agree with what Alfred's saying. And as far as clinical vignettes go, I'm sure Alfred could tell some similar stories. We've had some people who historically had roots on the Upper East Side, 2nd, 3rd generation Upper East Side pre-war co-op families who did exactly that. They bought downtown at 145 Hudson, or, you know, the Hubert or 101 Warren, and realized the schools that we want to send our children to are back uptown. And you might as well commute from Suffolk County on a weekday morning if you want to get your kid from Tribeca on Leonard Street to to Chapin or Nightingale or Marymount. So I think we've seen people come back for the fact that the practicality is there. And I think if you look at the Upper East Side, the concentration, there's so much diversity in terms of culture, in terms of food, in terms of education, recreation in the 5 boroughs. But if you look at the Upper East Side, the concentration of those important items is probably unparalleled, from and I'm not selling to somebody specific, so I can probably say this, but religious institutions, places where people gather, some of the most gorgeous architecture in terms of that class of buildings exists on the Upper East Side, and numerous options, whether you're, you follow one religion or faith or another, there are options for you. Then you have Central Park, rivaled in New York City, maybe only by Prospect Park. And then on the other side of that, you have world-class healthcare. So you have all the things. You're going to stay in shape and stay healthy by running in the park until you're in your 70s or 75. And then you're going to go and get cared for in the hospitals on the east side of the Upper East Side when you get older than that, right? So you have everything right at your fingertips. I mean, we rent to people who come into Manhattan specifically for medical and healthcare treatments. They don't have the options in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, and they'll stay. They'll say, "Hey, we need a short-term rental. We're having a procedure." That's not uncommon. So world class. Obviously, the museums. I don't think we need to discuss those specifically, but recreation, education, religion, healthcare, all those things happen, and they're all accessible easily on the Upper East Side.
I don't get it. My information is decades old, but the Upper East Side, growing up when I was a little kid, was it. It was the only thing that existed. And if you told me to go up to the Upper West Side, I would say, I don't know how to get there. The subways don't really go there. And if you talk to me about Brooklyn, I'd say, I don't think I can get there. So to your point, if you're looking for convenience, the public transportation system has existed on the Upper East Side to serve the Upper East Side into the Midtown since the beginning of time. And everything else was too hard to get to. What changed? Why did at some point I blinked and the Upper West Side got cool and Roberto moved there, and then everybody saw the movie Big in the 80s and they're like, I want a loft apartment with an open floor plan, and I can't get that on the Upper East Side. So I think I'll go down to Tribeca, or I'll go down to Soho or whatever and get that kind of weird newfangled look. Is this right? Go ahead, Roberto.
Well, with regards to transportation, I don't think you were very resourceful, because there were 2 subway lines that went up to the Upper West Side, and there was only one that serviced all of the entire Upper East Side. Until recently, when the 2nd Avenue subway has come in, it has absolutely changed the probability of people living on the Upper East Side going further and further east. So that has been a massive change.
And I don't know about you, John, but I used the bus system constantly when I lived on the Upper East Side. It got me everywhere I needed to go.
So that's the question, where on the Upper East Side? You say, I live on the Upper East Side. The next question is, where? Because it's so big. Where did you live?
Where did I live?
I lived.
Oh, go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Meredith.
I lived in 2 places. I lived on Madison and 80th in a brownstone over the Lobster Club, and my apartment could look into Mayor Bloomberg's house. So I had New York City, Central Park, I had everything there. And then I bought a place over on East 81st Street, 345 East 81st Street, with a terrace overlooking First. Kept my car on 96th Street. And I had a marathon party because the race ran right under my terrace every November. So
Meredith is very fancy. If you guys are not getting a sense, terraces and her car, convenient.
John, it was a studio apartment. Yes, I had a doorman, but at some point I was making enough money to have a car in the city. And that's the other beauty of Manhattan, of Upper East Side. You can get out of town really fast.
Yes, you can.
The Upper East Side makes so much perfect sense as a place to live in the city that it was too predictable for people. And I think people wanted to move away from what was built to be a traditional type of neighborhood, where there was the transportation and the laundry and all the grocery stores, and everything just made sense, and all the perfect transportation and the buses and the subways and the car services. that I think people wanted a departure from what was traditional and what was expected and what they thought their parents had and wanted. And I think that was part of the move to downtown. It was something different, sexy. Artists were down there. There was a lot of experimentation, and people are, there's an energy that started downtown, and people are attracted to energy. Like if you're going to go out to dinner, you're attracted to go sit in a crowded restaurant, not an empty restaurant, right? It's kind of like the East Side. It quiets down at night, right? There aren't any clubs on the Upper East Side, but downtown, there's a lot of people, and people are just attracted to people. And I think that was the primary reasons of the switch. Plus, it was less expensive downtown at one point. The Upper East Side was very expensive compared to the West Side, downtown, and even Brooklyn. But now there's a reversal. The Upper East Side actually has incredible value compared to downtown and Brooklyn. And that's one of the reasons why people are considering the Upper East Side. Also, many people want to have, two primary homes. They want, since the pandemic, they want to live in Manhattan a few days a week and live outside the city, whether it's upstate, Hudson, the Hamptons. And this allows them to own two homes now without making many compromises if you're in the position to do so. So
Alfred, where do you see the value? If you come back uptown, where's the value? Because the value still doesn't necessarily exist on Fifth and Park and those places.
Actually, I disagree with you. Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue did not go up in value in the last 10 years like downtown grew and those new condos grew. It never went up. So you can buy Fifth Avenue property, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom for a few $1 million. I mean, I don't mean to make that sound like a little amount of money. It's not, but relative to other properties, it is.
However, do you not agree that those also come with tremendous compromises as far as what you can get in a more modern building? That's the one thing I think that has suffered about these 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 room apartments on the Upper East Side. They're extraordinary proportions, but you have a master bedroom and you have a toilet, a shower, a toilet and a bath and a sink. That's it. But downtown or across, now you start getting towards like the Beckford, you walk into the bathroom, it's the size of a bedroom and everybody has their own sink and their toilets. And it's a different, so there's a tremendous compromise. And if you do come uptown and buy something that you're talking about, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist, you probably have to renovate it.
Yes, and that's why there is tremendous value, because you can get in at a price point that's perhaps, 60%, 70% of something else downtown, or tremendously less than a condominium. Yes, condominium lifestyle offers you amenities that you've never had before in the building, but you have much smaller rooms in a condominium. Now, if you're empty nesters, you don't care so much about that. But when you've got kids and other members of the family, you need space. And if you have a budget, you've got it, as every real estate agent knows, you got to give on something. And if you can't give on price, then maybe you give on location. And so there are opportunities on the Upper East Side, whether it's Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue, East End, Lexington, Third, or any of the side streets. There are opportunities there that you're not going to see on the West Side, Midtown, downtown, or even Brooklyn. So that's why people are looking at it as a value gain. And yes, the renovations are a big part of some of the properties that have been sitting. But again, it's an opportunity, and that's starting to turn around. The other big plus that we're seeing is there's a lot of changes in the co-op rules. Co-ops are becoming more and more flexible. Where there was no financing permitted, now we're seeing financing. Where there was 50% financing maximum, now there's 75% financing permitted. So co-ops are starting to get with it if they want to see values continue to increase. If you remember, co-ops were never developed as an investment. It was developed as a private membership because people wanted to control who they lived with, just like a private membership. But
not much has changed. Not much has changed.
Well, but it's changed a lot. I mean, I started a few decades ago, and the discussions I used to have with my colleagues and who can get into a co-op are very different today than they were 20 plus years ago. So they are getting flexible. And Neil, I mean, you guys manage many buildings throughout Manhattan. You know about the changes that are going on. We manage a lot of buildings. In fact, I'm probably going to have the gentleman, John Gianangelo, who runs our management companies, speak to our agents on a next sales meeting and talk about the new flexibility in co-ops. And that helps people to get in and buy. So there's a renaissance. I think there's a renaissance. We also have a new magazine coming out in the fall called Vicinity, and it is focusing on nothing but the Upper East Side. And it's bringing to light all these positive aspects, the museums, the culture, the restaurants, different lifestyles, and value and property and beautiful properties. I mean, we talked about properties that need renovation, but there's also a tremendous number of properties that have been beautifully renovated. And those are really the ones that go the first. You know, if you don't have to do work, you know, boom, you're in. So
what are the 5 questions I need to ask? So I'm coming to New York. I got a job. I'm looking for I'm a value shopper, and you're like, you know, you might want to think about the Upper East Side. And I think, oh my gosh, it's enormous. How do you think about the different sections of the Upper East Side? What are the 5 sort of things I need to think about? It occurs to me that the park on one side, well, do you want to be close to the park? Do you want to be close to the river? Or do you want to be close to a subway? What are some of the other things that people ask when they're thinking about the difference between, say, 80th Street and 86th Street, you know, or should be asking?
Oh, they want to know about public transportation, where the subway stops are, the type of building, whether it's pre-war or post-war. They want to know about what stores or shops are nearby, height, views, exposure, light. A lot of those things make a difference. Once upon a time, you know, people preferred pre-war over a post-war because of the higher ceilings and the architectural detail. But I don't think that's as strong today as it once was, and that's because of all the new condominiums sort of made post-wars kind of look a little bit better than they once were. So people are more flexible about that. And it's about, you know, if they have children, where are the kids going to school? Are they going to walk to school, or are they being driven to school? So there's a lot of different factors. And what's your budget? You know, is there flexibility on the budget? Are you financing, or are you all cash? How are you using the property, primary or secondary or pied-à-terre? What does the building allow? Once you start asking all those questions, you very quickly whittle down the number of possibilities that there are.
The one thing that people don't realize about the Upper East Side is that there are a lot of buildings that require 50% down. I mean, if you're on the Upper West Side, you're going to get 25% down, 33.5% down, you know, 20% down, a lot. Generally, people who are looking Park, you know, Madison, you know, over to Lex, an overwhelming number of those buildings are 50% down. But on top of that, so as Alfred was saying, they've lightened up some of the requirements, but some of that's just like on the sticker of the car, right? It says, we no longer require 50% down. We'll allow you to just put 33% down. However, you have to dig deeper, because a lot of those buildings still have these unspoken guidelines for post-closing liquidity. And they want you to have 1 to 2 times the value of the apartment in liquid assets after you close. I mean, I have a guy who's looking for an apartment. He's in education. Makes great income. He's looking for something on the Upper East Side, looking for a really beautiful pre-war 1-bedroom. His price range is anywhere from 1.5 to 1.8. He makes great money, but everything we see, he can afford it, and he could really make it work. But they want him to have 1.5 to 2 times the value of the apartment after he closes. He doesn't have $3 million lying around. He just doesn't. And he's got great income. And that building is actually hurting itself, because here is a great potential shareholder, a great potential neighbor, and he's not even allowed to consider that apartment because of that purpose.
Why are you saying that's an Upper East Side kind of thing?
I'm not saying it's because it's most common on the Upper East Side. Most common.
Don't
You
forget.
got it on the Upper West Side too. I mean,
Sure, but it's fewer and far between. If you have out of 100, you have 60 buildings on the Upper East Side that have 50% down. On the Upper West Side, you might have 15, literally.
Don't forget monthly maintenance. That's part of the budget as you're trying to go in. You could have a monthly maintenance of, you know, I'm just throwing out numbers, $1,000 or $4,000. So that's something you got to look at.
I think what's important to add here is that while that might seem like overkill, these layers of protection, so to speak, you have had probably, I don't even know if it reached 3% in terms of a default rate on residential property in the Upper East Side. So there's and we had two extreme events in just the last 15 years. If you think back to 2008 and you had the COVID situation, and you weren't seeing foreclosures all over the place. I mean, the market didn't get hammered. I'll back up a second and talk about the fact that markets reach equilibrium if left alone over time. You know, it's not an instantaneous proposition, right? So you talked about what was the motivation for people to move downtown. Those neighborhoods got safer, right? You've heard stories probably by the dozens. A taxi driver wouldn't take me to Soho in 1968. And in the 70s, they wouldn't take me to Tribeca. But as the artists, as somebody said, maybe Alfred, moved into those areas, and the housing stock or the conversions presented a different type of housing stock, that drew people's attention, right? And that energy drew people, as Alfred said. And so that curiosity led people away. But then those values started to suffer a little bit on the Upper East Side until people realized, hey, this is still a fantastic neighborhood for all the reasons we mentioned, and the values are a little bit better. So yes, I don't have the post-purchase liquidity, but there are also lots and lots of buyers out there. And I think a lot of these co-op boards, they run this calculus. Are we hurting ourselves value-wise because we're asking for too much after the purchase, or are we really protecting ourselves so we don't fall into that sort of common category where when times get tough, economically challenging times, or some external event, we're not in the same helpless bucket as these other multifamily complexes in other parts of the country, or even other parts of the city, if you will. So there's a balance, and again, back to what we had said, there does seem to be quite a bit of understanding from some of the more I don't want to say progressive, but some of the boards that certainly board members who care as much as the people we're seeing. We've been asked probably no fewer than 7 times to talk to board members about what they can do in their building specifically, and this is just in the last few years, to stay competitive with the condos. I mean, you saw that gap. It was about 15% condo price versus similar co-op price, 20, 25. I mean, there are sectors of the city that you're talking about 35 and 40% spread, condo versus co-op for the same or similar product in terms of square footage, in terms of elevation in the building. And these co-ops understand that. They're sophisticated people typically who bought in. They're sophisticated people on the board. A high percentage of them really care about not only values for themselves, but for their fellow shareholders. And slowly, as I said, equilibrium takes time, but they're taking steps proactively to maintain and relaunch value appreciation in these buildings.
Nobody in 74 weeks of this show has attempted to explain the co-op board mindset. Thank you finally for explaining to me, because all we do on this show is we complain about co-op boards. So thank you for giving me an honest assessment of what's going through their heads.
Well, I'll tell you quickly, we have a training program here, and we go through the purchase application for a co-op for new agents, for agents who want a refresher. One of the things I do is I say, hey, raise your hand if it's 12, 10, 12, 15 people, how many people have been on a co-op board? And invariably we get 1 or 2 people in every session. So I was the treasurer, I was this, I was that. Well, what happens when that application comes through to you? It goes to the managing agent, who takes a few different steps, runs a credit or background check, and then submits it to the members of the co-op board. Some people would say, hey, we didn't even look at it until the next meeting. Some people would say, well, we went through it page by page on, on the living room, on the ottoman in the living room. Bottom line is they're all individuals. They're all human beings just like you. So what are they doing? It's not a black box. They're going to look at it just like anybody else would look at it who's not a robot, right? And I think you have to keep that in mind. And if nothing else, there's a self-preservation issue or motivation. I don't want to lose value as a shareholder, right? As a board member, what can I do to maintain my value, the value of my asset?
I'll push back just a little bit because I still think it's a little bit overboard for some of those buildings that are like all cash, 3 times the value. That's just, you're reducing your prospective pool of purchasers. You have the ability to approve or reject an application based on their finances, but you shouldn't give people the Heisman before they even have a chance to consider it. That's just all I feel. And I think that yeah.
I'm sorry, a lot of the buildings that you're referring to are the Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue, and some East End Avenue buildings.
That's the only thing that Roberto sells. If it's not 5 million and up, he just doesn't.
The owners of those properties, their wealth and assets are much greater than the value of that apartment. Many of them, the artwork is greater value than the apartment.
Agreed.
So for them, they have very different needs. And for them, it's more about, like kind in the building, unlike a condominium. And I think that mentality is is a turnoff to many people who would otherwise enjoy living in a building in a glorious, architecturally rich, detailed building. There are the other buildings are wannabe Park Avenue and Fifth Avenue buildings, and
those are the worst. Those are the worst.
And those buildings, like they think, and the quote is they think they're a Park Avenue building, they think they're a Fifth Avenue building, and it's like, and they have these ridiculous requirements to get into the building.
I had a huge argument with a couple of brokers last year about that. There was an apartment that was down the block on 79th Street. It's like they kept saying for a Park Avenue co-op, for a Park Avenue co-op. I said, it's not on Park. It's way down there.
But if you look at, sure, okay, they have a financial concern and they have a responsibility to ensure that someone who's buying into the building is financially sound. But when you look at a condo, there's really no board approval in a condo. How many people are fault on ownership of a condo? I don't know of any. Do you, Neil, know of any?
Yeah, I do.
Any?
Yeah, I have had to deal with federal bankruptcy attorneys representing the estate on more than a couple of occasions in the last few years. Absolutely.
Okay. I stand corrected. I'm not aware of many. It's not a tremendous amount. So I think the requirements for co-op boards are overboard.
Well, so I'll add this though. Now I'll take the other side of the argument and agree with Roberto for a minute. If I have a child, I do have a child, and she's fortunate enough to get into Harvard, if that's where she wants to go, but she wants to study calculus, or she could get into the local community college. They're offering her a scholarship for an associate's degree, but she still wants to study calculus. Is calculus different at Harvard than it is at the local community college? No. That math works no matter where you learn it. You could learn it online the same way, but it would be terrific if she could network with those other well-to-do students whose mothers and fathers and grandparents are titans of industry, because she wants to use calculus for another reason. She wants to work at a company like, designing the latest rocket ship. Or
are you talking about the calculus of the 92nd Street Y? I think you're talking in code here.
So my point, to be less code driven, is that I think that those requirements they remain in place for a number of reasons, because they're selective. And then as Alfred said, I think it was Alfred, you're around like-minded people, and there's a networking element to it, whether it's social or it's professional and career-minded, or, who knows, relationship minded in terms of a future for the kids. All those things are probably factors to some degree.
Talk to me about the river. It occurs to me that we've got two rivers in Manhattan, and everybody thinks they want to go to the west side, look at the really pretty river with the sunsets over the river and the beautiful, but we've got another river, and nobody's even mentioned the word river once. We got the East River, and I remember seeing some of these really cool apartments advertised, like Greta Garbo's apartment with East River views. And I thought, that's as cool as it gets. Talk to me about the importance of a river. Some people want a river view, and you got two choices for them. How do you think about the two rivers?
The two rivers. Well, if you live at the top of 432 Park Avenue, you have both rivers.
There you go.
And many of these towers, everything becomes very narrow, and you see everything. So it's not an option anymore. But the East River, if you go into some of the buildings on East 70 or East 86th Street, close to the river, and you have on a high floor looking north up the river sort of turns at that point, and it almost has a very European feeling to it. People are attracted to water, but I have to say that the park commands a much greater value than the river does, and that's because of the river. The river is farther out, the outside of the island. I mean, I live on 79th Street in a condo, and I walk my dog towards the river every morning, and I'm always amazed by a barge going by, and you just see a small sliver of the barge because the buildings are blocking either ends, and I'm astounded by this massive vessel that's moving just sort of a block from where I'm walking. And so for me, I love living near the river.
You're telling me there's not enough inventory with cool river views on the east side, that most people say, all right, I guess I'll look at the park. If I have all the money in the world, there's just not that many choices on the East River, right?
But there's not that many choices. And also, if you live on East End River, which has glorious views of the river and Call Shores Park, you're not close to a subway. And so you're dependent on, now, we have Uber and things like that, but you're not walking to the subway stop every morning. So it's limited. It's very limited who's going.
Super rich people do not walk to the subway. It's not a problem for the super. So all the money in the world, are there any cool buildings with a view of the river on the east side?
Yeah.
There are, but they're new and they're expensive because all the other ones are all old, for the most part, post-war buildings.
Well, that's what I want. I'm
it's pretty
super rich.
remote over there, John. It's pretty remote. And people also, they're like, I want to be in Sutton. I'm just like, you want to be in Sutton? That is far away.
But
from
Sutton,
what?
you can walk into Midtown.
From everything.
No.
I've heard of Sutton. Fancy people
far.
have heard of Sutton, and they say, I want, and it's a name brand. It's out. Take me to Sutton. I want Sutton, where there are other fancy people, fancy buildings, and a view of the river. And you're saying it's far away from what?
What's it far away?
Civilization.
Sutton is turning over a lot. And so New York City is doing a lot of transactions in Sutton Place because there's also tremendous value in those post-war buildings, many of which have river views. So it's, people go to these areas for value because they don't want to necessarily compromise on space. I need 2 bedrooms, I can't fit in a 1 bedroom, or I need 3 bedrooms, can't fit in a 2. And when you can't compromise on your price, you change your neighborhood. And Sutton has tremendous value. You walk over to that area and everything quiets down. And some people like that in the evening. They don't want buses and trucks and people screaming in bars outside their window. They're not going to sleep, right?
It is really good value. I have a client who's been looking everywhere, and all of a sudden they decided Sutton, and I was actually stunned when I was like, wow. You get quite.
What are the parameters?
It took me forever to get there, but
What are the parameters of Sutton Place?
what's that?
What are the parameters of Sutton Place?
South of 59th Street Bridge, like 57th, 59th, down to say what, 53rd, something like that.
So technically that's Midtown East.
Yeah, but way east.
Yeah,
No,
I
but
thought
you
54th.
would call it Sutton as well as being on Sutton. So like that
It's
was.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
it's also one of those areas like Gramercy, when people say I want to live in Gramercy, they like want to live on the park. And everything define itself as Gramercy, and it's like an avenue away. And it's like, this is like, what is this? This isn't Gramercy.
I mean,
So they say Sutton and Roberto says, yeah, you can't get there from here. No, can't get there.
I mean, part of the charm about Sutton though is you don't have any sort of commercial activity, no restaurants, no retail on Sutton. So you don't have trash to deal with. You don't have sanitation trucks. You don't have as much of an issue with, pestilence or infestation. You're not walking among as much garbage during the day. You don't have crowds of people smoking outside in front of the restaurant. So there is as you said, there's a little bit of a calming effect over there. Same thing, I think, with East End Avenue. But the one thing I would say in response to the question from the guy with all the money in the world is, you can't use the river for any type of recreation or anything that you might want to do outside of look at it. So you get over there. Yeah, well, I mean, you probably now, I think didn't they find dolphins up in the Harlem River or the Bronx River the other day, or some type of sea life. So people who buy closer to the park with unlimited funds versus the river, I think they feel like there's a little more utility to the park. You're a little closer to the museums, but if you buy the river, maybe you're closer to a couple of schools. I think Brearley has invested heavily over there and in their campus.
I thought there was good jogging along the East River. No, not a good jogging.
Yes.
No, there is. I mean, you could jog. There were people who jog up and down Madison Avenue at rush hour, which always seems like they're maybe training for a Tough Mudder. I can't figure out the motivation to weave in and out of those people, but they do it. The other thing about the river, you get this in Tribeca, you get this on Riverside Boulevard, and on the far east side is the wind, Alfred. I don't know how big your dog is, but you got to keep an eye on that pup, because some of those gusts come by and you might be that leash might pull you right into the river.
Nothing like the Hudson River gusts.
Yeah, okay.
Riverside
Tribeca.
Boulevard, you got to weigh yourself down with sandbags.
Exactly. So.
For sure. But if you do want that kind of peaceful living, you could easily live on West End or Riverside, and you actually are very close to like civilization, all your services, your Fairway, your Citarelli, your Zabars, and things like that. And you're actually not as far as you are on the East River. That's really far away.
When you're talking about proximity to parks.
Yeah.
Well, you can't network with people as much on West End Avenue as you can, right, Roberto? Because they let people in at 25% down.
I know they're slumming it over there. It's like.
Actually, what I hear Roberto talking about mostly is food. I don't see Roberto as really particularly interested in the parks. He keeps talking about Zabars and and I think it's interesting because growing up a long time, Upper West Side was totally residential. There wasn't a lot of restaurants. I think the restaurants have moved in, made it cool, made it hip, made it much more of a neighborhood. What happened in the meantime to all those little tiny stores on the east side? A lot of retail on the east side that you never saw on the west side. What happened? Is it turning over? Are we seeing the restaurants? I remember, I'm really dating myself now, but coming up the First Avenue bus, you'd see places like Dangerfields, and Dangerfields is gone. And a lot of those are gone. And I don't know that they've necessarily turned over into hip places. What do you think? The restaurant scene. What's the restaurant scene on the Upper East Side?
Second Avenue is a mecca of restaurants with outdoor seating from the 70s into the upper 80s. You walk up and down Second Avenue, and it's primarily restaurants on both sides of the avenue, and it is buzzing. It's packed with people. So
good restaurants too.
Yeah. All kinds of food, all cultural types of food you'll find.
And the Second Avenue subway also helped bring that about. And buildings like the Beckford and things like that that established themselves on Second Avenue. I mean, I had a client who weren't my client, they're just dear friends. They were happened to be working with somebody else. And she was looking at the Beckford, and I said, it's a really nice building. She said, but who wants to live on Second Avenue? And now, 4 years later, she really regrets not having bought there in the beginning because she feels like it's completely changed over.
Roberto, I went to the opening of the Beckford, and brokers were invited, and I was listening to the conversation of the agents, and they were saying, who's going to pay these prices on Second Avenue? Okay, this is what the agents were saying. That building, which is comprised of 2 buildings, is sold out.
It's incredible.
All right, they're stunning apartments, architecturally gorgeous, or the buildings are gorgeous. People who were looking to buy and needed space and don't want to do work bought the Beckford, and they paid higher prices, but the buildings sold out. And that's not the only condominiums that have sold out. There's 109 East 79th Street, and there are buildings on Madison Avenue, new developments. They
Robert A. Stern building at 82nd and 3rd.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Well,
I haven't heard anybody say the word Park Avenue in 47 minutes. Is the bloom off the rose on Park Avenue living?
I don't think so. Not for a second. I think what you did have, and back to Dangerfields, by the way, I think Dangerfields was a COVID victim. I don't think that they would have had a problem staying in business. I think that any of those live performance venues, they suffered, right, with all the restrictions. And I think what's happened on Park is you would have people come in because they're older buildings, the housing stock is older pre-war. You would have people who were willing to come in and really renovate. And right now, the prospect of a major renovation, Scott, no disrespect to what's going on over there by you for people, both in terms of cost of materials and in terms of how much more difficult life became after COVID or during COVID. I think people's motivation to take on a major renovation project is probably depressed a little bit. And I think that will come back. You also had a backlog. Alfred, you could probably speak to this too. If somebody bought and was mid-renovation in late 2019, all of a sudden those plans got put on hold. Anybody else who closed became part of a waiting list to get their renovations started. Some of these buildings have restrictions in terms of the number of projects that can happen concurrently. And it just people said, well, how many renovations? I mean, we had that question asked time and time again. How many renovation plans or alteration agreements have been approved in the last year and a half? Okay, I'm number 5 on the list. I don't want to touch it because it'll take forever. I won't move in for 3 years.
I can't just make friends with the doorman, right,
No.
Scott? That's how it works, right? We just make friends with the doorman and it's all good.
No.
I mean, it's a great point that when they limit the number, a lot of people don't recognize that they don't want to be inconvenienced by construction, but they don't recognize the impact on their own property values over time, that if you're 5th on the list, no one's going to buy the apartment if it needs to get work on. Because again, you're going to buy the apartment, sit on it for 2 years, and then do a year and a half renovation, and you can't use it until then. And it's tough.
What about, Scott, what about these buildings that have summer work rules? Can you explain to me the strategy? You buy a $10 million apartment and you can only work for 3 months out of the year. I mean, you're building a ton of stuff off site and then you're coming in and you're just like a puzzle, just putting stuff. I mean, how does that work from your point of view?
You schedule it all to the last day and you understand how you can get everything there. And you come to terms with the fact as to whether or not is the summer just a dead period, or can you actually get it done? And so sometimes it kicks certainly it kicks a 12-month project into a 14, 15, 16-month project. And that's just the way that it is.
So what I'm hearing is that Park Avenue has got some grand old apartments that maybe aren't getting the prices they should get because people are nervous about the cost, and not just the cost of price, and you just said materials, but the total cost of time of renovating those great old ladies, those great old apartments off of Park Avenue. Is that what's driving the value of them down?
No, that's not the only thing driving the value. The term luxury is interpreted in many different ways now. Once upon a time, a grand, Rosario Candela property on Park Avenue was the type of property in luxury, but luxury now means, a modern condominium with double height ceilings and amenities that you can count on two hands in a building. That's a different type of luxury. Views become a luxury. Park Avenue is not known for views. You don't live on Park Avenue for the views. You live on Park Avenue because of the architecture and the prestige of the address, and you pay a premium for that. But now there are alternatives to that, to luxury, and that's competing with what I just mentioned. So that's part of the reason why the desirability is not there. Also, as was mentioned, when you have to renovate. Today, people don't want to wait 2 and 3 years for a renovation. And the cost of renovation is what, $1,000 a square foot, about, or more plus?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're getting any, I mean, you're barely touching up for like 300 to 400. And then as you start to renovate, 5, 6, 7, 8 is easy. And as you get into really nice finishes, you can crack 1,000 without really sweating.
Right. So you have a 3,000 square foot apartment, you're putting $3 million into it, and you're waiting 2 years to move in. So you've got to cover those expenses and the lack of the use of the money for 2 years. So you got to add on to that $3 million. So those are in those types of buildings, that's what's holding back the value and the turnover of those properties. But I think the handwriting is on the wall, and if these boards want fresh blood in their buildings, they have to loosen up the policies. And we're starting to see the loosening up of the policies. The summer rules are expanding. Multiple properties can be worked on simultaneously. Greater flexibility with financing, or parents buying for children, or co-purchasing. There's different types. Foreign buyers buying in trusts and in LLCs. That's starting to expand because people like to buy in especially in condos. They like to buy in LLC. And so now that we're seeing that more and more in co-ops.
I also,
the other thing
sorry.
about,
Go ahead.
go ahead, please.
One thing I do want to add, I know, because I hear it all the time, well, the prices are depressed. Park Avenue, pre-war co-ops are getting hammered. 2006, the fourth quarter for pre-war apartments, and we use a price per room across the city in co-ops as a metric, and usually a pretty accurate one. I think that number was just under $300,000, $294,000 was the average price per room for a pre-war co-op on the Upper East Side at Q4 2006. We had the collapse in 08, 09, slow to recover. And then we had a pandemic, which we're still sort of reeling from to a degree. But those prices as of Q4 2022 were at $342,000 per room in a pre-war Upper East Side cooperative. That's an 18% increase through the equivalent of 2 calamities and the proliferation of condominiums. And I would even say, Second Avenue, as much as it has going on, you got to keep in mind that that Beckford, the house and tower, were priced very differently when introduced to market. They took a huge price cut across those units before they became so in demand. They priced that project at a much higher multiple than they ended up actually selling them, and they publicly reduced those prices to get people in. So while you're probably making money if you were an initial buyer or you bought directly from the sponsor and you're reselling today, it wasn't a project that met its sort of forecast.
I think one of the big factors is just the supply. In 2010, 11, I had a client looking for 10, 11, $12 million apartment. And I searched everywhere, Upper East, Upper West, along Central Park West and Fifth and Park and stuff like that. And we probably had a total of 15 things to look at that were anything that even like plausible. If I were to do that search today, guaranteed I'd probably come up with 45, 50, 60 apartments I could show in that price range as an option. So, you know, they're no longer the 10 girls on the dance floor. There's 100 on the dance floor, and they just get less attention.
Or men on the dance floor too. If there were 10 versus 100, they would get less, or people who don't necessarily identify in the binary scale. But here's the other thing. In 2010, 2011, on the nickel for every time somebody said, you know, in that class of comments and cataloging those comments, for I want to buy somebody's apartment who worked at Lehman, you know, I want to buy Dick Fold's apartment and his sister's apartment and his, you know, his nephew's apartment. Well, you know, those people came into those properties with, which is obviously not something Roberto's happy about, with a lot of money before, you know, Lehman happened, and that cushion helped people. So when you'd get those buyers, Roberto, in 2010 and 2011, who said, I want to buy, you know, I work at XYZ hedge fund or investment bank or startup, whatever the flavor of the day was at that time, and I want somebody who's in pain, you know, I want one of those apartments. Well, guess what? The guy or the gal or the family that owns those apartments, they were just like the person who's trying to buy. Very successful, well capitalized, bright, competitive, and not willing to take a loss, and didn't need to take a loss. So there was no inventory because those people didn't need to sell. You know, there were very few people who were forced to sell in 2010, 2011. There were reports of the market being down 25%, except you'd see one data point in a sub-market that said this building, this unit traded down 25%. That wasn't common throughout the market. You had very few data points to support the kind of move that everybody advertised to the downside.
Yeah, I agree.
I want to spend more time with Neil. I think this is great. Co-op boards are not as evil as you think, and statistics lie. I love this guy. We're going to have to get him
Statistics
back.
tell the
Roberto.
truth, but my hourly rate is going up based on this. I just want you to know. So I'm no longer at the paralegal rate.
So what is your best idea? I mean, what is the building or the neighborhood that you just lust over in New York, where you say, if something came on and it was a fantastic deal, that's where I want to move? And I got to assume that there's some choice fruits on the Upper East Side that everybody wants if a deal were to come up. Have you got any great things that you know, I mean, you guys keep talking about the Beckford. Is the Beckford the only hot building?
No, there are others, but a lot of them have been sold out, really.
Yeah.
But if something came up, is there some brand building that everybody goes, oh, I want that? Anything comes up, you let me know.
Well, I mean, if you're talking new development, you had the Belmont, I think that was 86th Street and Madison, and then you had the Benson. Everybody's on the, I guess, on the B naming track. That was at 79th and 1045, right? Madison, that sold out.
109 East 79th Street sold out.
Yep.
One on East 78th and Lex also sold out, right?
151, I think it was. That's 25 units, another Robert A.M. Stern project. I think they have that, they have maybe a couple of units left there. And then you have
the fantasy property is high ceilings, big windows, a terrace with a view of the park and a view of downtown Manhattan and the river. That's like the fantasy type of apartment.
Yeah.
You find that there are a number of them are along Fifth Avenue. You have that. You have East End Avenue, 79th Street. There's some 135 East 79th Street.
Mhm.
From the very high floors, you'll get some of that. But that's more like the fantasy type of apartment. But I'm not aware of any. If something comes up in a building, you know, let me know that address. I'll buy anything. I don't think that's the case.
And I think it's block specific too. I mean, if you were to run on 70th Street between Fifth Avenue all the way to 3rd Avenue, you're going to be in a good spot if you can find something that's a deal, right? You know, look, there's just a lot of attention on the Upper East Side. The other factor that you have to look at, it's almost like, I guess it's analogous to saying that, 25, 30 years ago, Dumbo was going to appreciate in value because a Starbucks moved in, right? Look at the same sort of variables or factors that are at play. How much money did Dalton spend on their campus? How much money is Marymount spending for a new theater facility, a brand new theater ground up, I think it is, a new gym? That's a $90 million project. So why are these institutions continuing to invest so much money? And then you mentioned, Alfred, earlier in the program, how many new developments there are. I mean, Robert A.M. Stern has 3, maybe 4 developments that he handled on the Upper East Side in the 70s and 80s in just the last couple of years. That doesn't even account for the 520 Park, which is a little bit closer to where I am. That was a Zeckendorf project that somebody just sold I think the 23rd floor or something for a profit from the sponsor.
Oh, 24 million was it about?
I think maybe that's what it was. Yeah, I think they paid 21 and sold it for 24, paid 19 and sold it for 21.
Right.
We're coming to a close here, and one thing we have not spoken about are the magnificent townhouses that are on the Upper East Side, especially on those park blocks. I mean, that's beachfront property. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Like, I have a client that's, he has tremendous square footage, but his wife wants to make a change and this and that. And the only chance that they're going to have that type of space and that type of room count is to really have a house, and they don't want to live in a house. He's just like, I need my doorman, I need my staff. So are those houses? I mean, there are, some of them are $80 million, $100 million. A lot of it, it's very common. Just these houses are 20, 26, 29, 30 million, and they need 10, $15 million worth of renovation. I mean, extraordinary. Do you guys have any thoughts about just how that market is, how that market's moving? And
That's always been it's a very slow moving market. Even in a fast-paced market, townhouses are a slow moving market. I mean, it's so slow that our townhouse report is a 10-year report. It comes out every 10 years.
Our report was a 10-year report too. It was good.
Is it slow because there's just so few transactions, or when one comes up, it takes a while to find the buyer because they're so weird?
If you're going to list a townhouse for sale, you probably want to take at least a 12-month exclusive, if not a 24-month exclusive. And it's just a different process. It's a different type of buyer. There are, few transactions compared to apartments. And it's a very special, it's a different type of living, a different type of responsibility. And it just takes longer to move it. It doesn't mean that they're not desirable. They are desirable. And when you go into some of these magnificent houses, you're blown away by the architecture, the width of the property, the height of the rooms, the windows, the gardens. But it's for a very specific type of buyer. Security is always a big issue when it comes to townhouses. You don't have a doorman. So do you have security living with you? Do you have bulletproof? I mean, I know houses with bulletproof windows in the front of the house that are put in. And, renovating a townhouse, you have to go through a historic district, or, you can't just change something. It's a special buyer.
I think the other issue is, it sounds like we need new printers on the townhouse reports. They take all those years to get that stuff printed for both companies. But the other thing that you have that's tricky with the townhouse market, and which contributes certainly to the length of time it takes for a listing to find a buyer, is the price discovery issue and the mechanism. You have so much variability, so much diversity in terms of the housing stock. It's limited housing stock to begin with for that product type, and then you have so many different types of architecture, and block by block carries certain bona fides, as they say, right? Or it's a currency of its own, the location. So where do you start the pricing? You don't want to leave $10 million on the table if it's a $70 million asset, right? I mean, those are big numbers for everybody. So I think what happens very often, I think it's rare, really rare in the townhouse sector to see something priced under market, right? I mean, to a man and woman, I think every listing broker, especially on the Upper East Side, who handles the townhouse is, as Alfred said, in it for the long haul. We're going to start it high. And because there are so few options, eventually we'll get to the right number when that buyer who wants it comes along. But we're not going to start it low. So we're going to see, what kind of reaction we get.
That's a great point.
One of the big advantages of a townhouse is that there's no application process and no board and no approval. It's like selling a house in the suburbs.
Even the oil tank issue has come up in townhouses in Manhattan, by the way. We had two deals that got disrupted because the owners in both cases, and I believe this is probably true, were not aware that there were oil tanks below the houses.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
So what
speaking of
I'm
the
hearing,
suburbs,
and we're running out of time, but I'll leave this one last thought, and I'll ask for each of you for a reaction, but I've got all the money in the world and I'm impatient. And what you're telling me is that both of you can find me, since I have all the money in the world, that the best, the coolest in Manhattan is often an Upper East Side townhouse. And you're both capable of finding me one. Even though there are so few of them, you guys can turn over rocks and find me something cool. Yes?
Oh, we can find you something cool, of course. And then you can
I'll
have
find it.
Roberta will find it.
yeah, Roberto's not accustomed to dealing with people with the kind of money you have, John. I mean, they're struggling in those for that post-purchase liquidity. So he's going to look at his advertisement, by the way, on his website. He has been known to jump across, lines of traffic to get a deal done. So I can assure you that if you show up with a couple of sackfuls of money, he's going to be there and he's going to uncover those hidden opportunities, turn over some rocks.
Well, it sounds like the townhouse is still the belle of the ball in the silk stocking district of Manhattan, the best district in Manhattan. It's still the best property there is. Yes?
Yes.
I
Okay,
agree with that. I really do.
I'll take it. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank
Yeah.
you for
Thanks
a
for
most
having us.
interesting and entertaining hour on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. I hope to have both of you back and continue this conversation. Maybe we'll tackle another neighborhood next time we're on.
Sounds
Thanks.
good. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Really
Thanks
appreciate
so much for having us. Appreciate it. Bye, guys.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
See you, Skipper.